This is the best of First and Last, the podcast, with Mike Golic Jr. and Robin Lundberg.
Sergio Garcia wins the Masters. Russell Westbrook puts up eye-popping numbers. James Harden throws some shade his way. The Cavs blow a 26-game or point lead. But a long time coming, Mike, for Sergio Garcia yesterday. What was it? The most ever appearances in the Masters without winning one, and finally gets it done yesterday.
Yeah, essentially the Mark Few of the PGA. A guy who everyone had been so conditioned to watching blow it in the big moment that was a lot of the story going into yesterday. So we had, by most accounts, a pretty darn good Masters weekend, coming off a first day where we had a guy that most people weren't really familiar with, and a guy whose name I'm forgetting right now, basically open up with a five-shot
Charlie
lead.
McCaffrey, was that his name?
No,
Charlie
Hoffman. That's the one. Charlie McCaffrey sounded right enough, but Charlie Hoffman and his wonderful reformed golden mullet took an early 5-stroke lead on Friday, and I was filling in with Stu Gatz on the Dan Le Batard show on Friday, and he's a huge golf nut, and one of the things he said was, I don't care if Charlie Hoffman wins, but what I care about is him running away and hiding with it too early. Wanted a close weekend, and that ended up being what we got, was a close, compelling weekend, even if it was devoid near the end of a lot of the traditional star power.
It's similar to what I said on Friday, because I didn't think that Dustin Johnson being out was that big a deal. It's a big deal maybe for golf fans who want to see the best player, but the golf fans are going to watch the Masters. If you're a golf fan, you're watching the Masters, right? It's like being a football fan and not watching the Super Bowl, or being a basketball fan and not watching the NBA Finals. You're a golf fan, you're watching the Masters. To me, if you're getting the random person over, what you needed was a bunch of people competing, and hopefully those people had at least moderate names. And that's exactly what they got yesterday, because you could see that casual reaction, people saying, all right, all these guys are in it for the hunt, including Sergio Garcia, and he has the reputation, I guess, of not getting it done in the big spots. Helps to play, a game where you can have such a long prime, where there can be your 19th appearance, and you still got another chance at it. It doesn't feel like it's even close to the end. And Sergio Garcia, he's going to enjoy this one for a long time, including the rest of his life.
I'm thrilled to be standing here this late on Sunday evening. It's always a beautiful thing to have. So it's been an amazing week, and I'm going to enjoy it for the rest of my life.
One thing I noticed is he really emerged as a protagonist in all that, because the crowd, both at the event itself, and it seemed like outside of the event itself, really was pulling for him.
Yeah, he had a lot of that underdog feel for a guy that had been around as much as he had, but it was interesting watching that occur on Twitter, because a lot of people, as I said, were almost rooting for the fall. I said it's kind of like a lesser version of NASCAR, where you feel bad saying it, but a lot of people watch NASCAR to see that big wreck, and a lot of people were tuning into the Masters on Sunday to watch that big moment where Sergio finally gave it away, and to his credit, he almost gave us that moment and then was able to pull himself out, so we got all of the thrill and agony of thinking we were going to watch a guy again succumb to a lot of the things that had been the defining portion of his career, and instead rise above it, which, if you're looking as casual sports fan, that's all of the nostalgia and romance and things that we love about sports built into one.
A little bit of a false equivalency there, a fiery car wreck and a missed putt.
Just a bit. There's only one person that's going to get really hurt, but you understand the idea.
Yeah, and it did seem like everybody was waiting for that to happen from him. Of course, it didn't happen. And looking at the golf statistics, my read as a novice would be he didn't screw up, right? He was sort of consistent in everything he did. It's not like he blew anybody away, but he hit 80% of his fairways, which was the second most. He hit 75% of his greens, which was the second most throughout the tournament. So he was just putting himself in position to not put himself out of position, I guess.
And that's usually, listen, it sounds like funny to say it in the context of golf, but really, how often do we hear that in the context of really any sport? Is I just didn't, I didn't beat myself, whether it's tennis, whether it's football, people just saying, I'm going to play and let my opponent make the big mistake. I'm going to just play the most consistent golf. And that was his goal going out in the weekend. And for a guy in his position who, admittedly along the way, because you heard him talking after the round, and it had been true where he came on early on to the scene and thought, when he was an amateur, he talked about playing at Augusta and saying, all right, this is going to be a place that gives me a major. And then during his career had said out loud at multiple points that he just didn't think it was going to be in the cards for him. It was a course that he never really felt comfortable on.
And we'll make that Straight Talk brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Sergio Garcia winning the Masters. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. It did seem like it drew a lot of people in yesterday. I have to be honest, like I had it on. It's just not my thing. I physically have a tough time, being captivated by golf. Maybe it's because I didn't play it. Maybe the lack of athleticism and all that. Clearly, a high-skilled game. Everybody knows about the degree of difficulty. But I'm not the case study here. I'm not the test subject, and I don't want to be raining on anybody's parade. It did feel like most people who are in our line of work or have similar interests were brought into the parade.
Yeah, so I think especially for Sunday, which is the big day in all of this, it had everything you needed, which was enough people close to the top of the leaderboard to start the day. I mean, Rory McIlroy, Jordan Spieth, all those names were still in contention near the top, in addition to Justin Rose and Sergio and the guys that were really leading the pack. So you had enough of those names in the final pairings to bring you in. The mid-portion of the day did get a little bit dry. There was a portion where it looked like guys were going to run away and hide with it, and then you finally had that big finish where, okay, down the stretch, we've got these two guys not only tied score-wise, but really trading blows. One would make a mistake, the other would capitalize, and then there would be that reversal going into ultimately giving us a playoff hole that we've seen a lot in sports this year, playoffs, overtime, what have you, in big moments. So it gave you all of that stock sports drama with two names that listen, Justin Rose and Sergio Garcia are known names in golf circles, and Sergio might even have been a little bit beyond that because of his reputation, but these aren't the dynamite stars of years past. These aren't the young golf stars like Rory McIlroy, like Jordan Spieth, like Ricky Fowler, who was also in contention for a lot of the weekend.
But none of those guys, to me, are captivating beyond the sport. None of those guys are transcendent. So I don't think it, again, like I said with Dustin Johnson, I don't think it makes much of a difference. Tiger Woods is the only guy I can ever remember where people were tuning in just for him. I can't speak to Jack Nicklaus's prime or anything like that, but Tiger Woods was a unique phenomena for a number of reasons. I mean, I think ethnic background, obviously. He was maybe the first guy that looked like he was in shape for a golfer that led to some of these other guys. So I don't think any of those other names, even if they're younger, even if they're stars, I don't think it really made a difference as long as there were sort of quasi-names who were close to the top of the leaderboard.
To me, what the PGA feels like right now is like what today's NBA would be like if you removed LeBron James. Like, if you remove LeBron James, who's our transcendent generational talent, the once-in-a-lifetime player, you've got a bunch of great players, a bunch of guys that are going to be champions and multiple champions, but you don't have anyone that's going to captivate the sport in that way, and that's what golf is missing right now. I heard them talking, I think it was Scott Van Pelt in one of the pieces leading up to the round, talking about how different portions of this had rated, and even some of the better rounds had rated 14 or 15 million, which is a lot of what we'd seen in the really good NBA games or NCAA games in the tournament. And Tiger Woods on the one Sunday, I think it was 21 years ago now, they were celebrating the anniversary of one of the marquee Tiger rounds that really put him on the map, did like 44 million viewers on that day. So that spoke to the awe-inspiring power of Tiger Woods and something that just doesn't exist in golf right now. There's no one dominant force, so you have to rely, you're right, on moments like this and on some of the name power. You still need these names that we know enough to bring people in, but it's not going to be the one person that carries you.
First and last, the podcast.
It's going to be tough to beat Russell Westbrook in the MVP now, man. Not that it wasn't before, but over the weekend, not only does he punctuate averaging a triple-double, not only does he break Oscar Robertson's record for most triple-doubles in a season, not only does he have another 50-point triple-double, giving him 3 on the season, which is more than anyone else has for a career, but he hits a 35-foot game winner to win the game yesterday as well.
For a storyline that we've talked about the entire season, I give Russell Westbrook a lot of credit because after a while, it's hard to say anything other than, wow, he's averaging a triple-double, but he's found ways like that to even outdo the statistic, one that you notice sort of arbitrary just because it has a name, but when you go out there and elevate even that statistic the way Russ has, he's found a way to make it impressive, in addition to, oh, by the way, his just overwhelming style of play. Like, for me, it was cool seeing Oscar Robertson come out and talk about it on SportsCenter over the weekend, and talked about just how impressive watching Russell Westbrook is, and part of that maybe gets forgotten in the narrative of the triple-double.
Yeah, there's no upside really for Oscar Robertson to do that, by the way. Brought to you by Upside We Are. Now save big on travel and get a big gift card every trip you buy. I sounded like Yoda there. You'll love Upside.com, Upside.com. Because Oscar Robertson's known for the triple-double. Let's be honest. I mean, the guy had a great career. There's no taking that away. And people who watched him, sure, will remember other things about it. But for younger folk, that's why you know him. That's why he's a frame of reference. And now that record has fallen, who's Oscar Robertson?
It becomes interesting, and you saw it's interesting now how the stats are starting to like evolve around Oscar Robertson to say, oh, well, he was more than just averaging a triple-double. Like, I think they said his first 5 or 6 years in the NBA, the average was about a triple-double. And so they're starting to move that around. And it's a double-edged sword. Some people will say that because of all this conversation, it's brought Oscar Robertson back into more of a discussion for
That's
a new
true.
generation of basketball fans than maybe would have happened otherwise. But I'm with you. That was such a singular association with him and that feat that now you can't help but expect it to sort of diminish that, because Russell Westbrook is going to be the most recent version of this accomplishment.
By the way, if Russell Westbrook had played at the same pace and minutes as Oscar Robertson's 61-62 season with his current production, his averages would be 51.4 points, 17.4 rebounds, and 16.9 assists per game from this season.
It really is wild to think about pace in that way, because I think we don't associate it with, you've brought it up, just the style of play that you were used to seeing back then, forgetting that there were that many more possessions going on in the body of a given game, as opposed to now in a game that feels a lot faster, but comparatively isn't. It's sort of hard to reconcile that in my peanut brain.
Well, and you go back and look at things that, what did Bill Russell shoot from the floor? Guys were not finishing sometimes at the same rate that they are, so the ball is coming off the rim more often, allowing for more up and down in that regard when it comes to possessions. But we're dealing with the now here and what Russell Westbrook did, and it really is incredible. One thing that's kind of a bummer about it to me, and I don't think the NBA makes too many mistakes, I do think they made a bit of a mistake with this whole award show that they're doing, which is postponed until June. So they're not announcing the MVP, I don't believe, until June 26th, I think is the date. And to me, that's anticlimactic, because we've had this great race. You have what looks like it's going to be James Harden and Russell Westbrook in the first round of the playoffs, by the way, which we'll get to in just a second. But you don't get to capitalize on this momentum. And it also opens the door for a lot of the skepticism that will come along with a playoff performance. If LeBron does what LeBron typically does, and then in June we're giving the MVP to somebody else, it's going to feel a lot worse than it would if we were giving Russell Westbrook the MVP right now.
And you can understand the NBA looking around at some of its peers, namely the NFL, and saying, all right, they have the NFL Honors Show. They've got these awards that people seem to be interested in. Let's do the same thing. But you're right. We saw it in college football this year where Lamar Jackson was the overwhelming best player in college football for so much of the year. Now, you could say stumbles in the regular season in November opened up this conversation, but this award, thankfully, is given out in December before the national title takes place. And Deshaun Watson went out and reaffirmed a lot of the things people had talked about him with and had a stellar championship performance, especially in that second half, to where you would have said, had the Heisman been given out after that, wow, it feels sort of weird to give it to anyone but the guy that we saw most recently excel like that. And the NBA could very much be the same deal.
Here was Russell Westbrook after breaking the triple-double record with Ramona Shelburne.
We did not have a man on the moon the last time somebody had more triple-doubles in a year than you. What does this mean to you?
It's a blessing, man. I give all the thanks to the man above. He's blessed me with unbelievable times to go out and compete. And so thankful for my teammates, my coaching staff, my family, my friends. I'm just so thankful.
No, that last bucket there, you didn't even need this win tonight, and you went for it and got 50. What happened there at the end?
Yeah, just go for it, man. We was going for the win, or we was going home. That's my motto, and tonight was an unbelievable game by both teams, and we came out with the win.
You've been going arena to arena. Opposing fans are chanting MVP, standing up, cheering for you to get the last assist. What's that feel like?
I mean, it's a blessing, something I could never imagine, man, growing up in the city of Los Angeles and now being here on the biggest stage of basketball. It's a truly blessing, and I'm just thankful to be able to play the game I love.
And now Russell Westbrook has had a bunch of those big shots, too. It's not just the triple-doubles. I believe that was the 8th shot he's had this year to break a tie or go ahead, or to tie or go ahead in a game with less than 24 seconds left in the game. So he's done really it all. When you're checking every box, there's not much. You can criticize him for stat padding, which he's done at times, stealing a rebound from somebody, assist hunting. I saw him do that on Friday night. His usage rate, which is out of control. But at some point, you're just overwhelmed. And that's what Russell Westbrook has done this year. He's been overwhelming.
And one thing we've talked about a lot is it's always translated to winning for his team. His record when he has a triple-double, his team's record when he has a triple-double is so overwhelmingly in the positive for them that you understand it's necessary. For all those things that you just said, it still ends up being vital to his team's success based on the way they're constructed. How about this for like a weird MVP-related stat for Russ? I saw this Taylor Rooks, who works at SNY in New York, tweeted, just a reminder about something completely ridiculous that happened. Russell Westbrook wasn't an all-star starter. So the guy that's probably going to win the MVP of the league this year didn't start in the all-star game.
First and last.
And we're going to let GoJo go on a rant here in a second about something that took place over the weekend. Maybe we should phrase this a little bit differently. Should we get people to sell me on why I missed out, even though I had the Masters on? Like, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to come around. I want to be an open-minded gentleman and everything. I don't want to just, like, my stock golf point to be it's not a sport every time. And that gets old after a while, right? So what is it? How do I flip that switch in my brain? Because I tried, and everyone's saying it's so great, and I just can't. It's not captivating to me. I guess you brought up in the break, Gary Player has been to 52 Masters. Like, maybe that's part of it, that your prime can be from 16 to 60. So it's not like impressive to me in the sense that, I get that it's difficult. I get how hard it is. Maybe I have to go out and play. Maybe we have to film me being embarrassing on a golf course or something like that.
That's, I think, we need as a first and last golf outing. But you're right. If you've got some sort of hook, because Robin, you're the king of morning hooks and trying to find interesting ways. If someone can figure out a hook to get Robin in on golf, you'd win the non-existent first and last T-shirt that we can't give you.
Because that should have been it yesterday, right? The drama. Everybody's talking about the drama, and objectively, it was there. Sergio Garcia, the guy who has tried so many times. I mean, this was his 19th appearance, the most ever for someone in the Masters to not have won. He had the knock of not coming through in the big spots and blowing it. You had other guys competing for the top of the leaderboard. It was wide open, so that drama is right there. I don't know if it's the music. I don't know if it's the lack of running. I don't know if it's the announcers whispering. There's just a whole bunch of factors that get me. So I'll contemplate it because I'm trying. I want to be a part of this. I mean, we're doing a show about it. It's one of the biggest events of the year. So I don't want to, disgrace Mike and Mike coming up, who are huge fans, especially Greeny. ESPN Radio, by the way, presented by Progressive Insurance. Now you can test drive Snapshot to see how much you could save before switching to Progressive. Visit progressive.com/snapshot. So try and convince me, or, if you want to go the other route, you can as well. 888-729-3776, 888-SAY-ESPN. And while you get ready, there's something that you did not like.
We got to talk about sportsmanship, guys. The Masters made me hate sportsmanship this weekend. And listen, I was a guy that certainly was a sportsman of my own right and believed in fair and balanced competition. And I never really trash talk my opponent or anything like that. But I appreciated people who did. And what I don't like is when we go fully over the top. And you mentioned Greeny, and this isn't to pick on him, but he was the poster child.
This isn't to pick on him, but
but he authored one of the tweets. I freaking love sportsmanship was his exact tweet. And I sat there, and he wasn't the only one. It was everyone up and down Twitter talking about how classy it was watching Sergio Garcia and Justin Rose high-five each other after good shots, or share a quick moment in passing, supporting each other, or how one guy got out of the way of the other guy's line, and all of these different moments where the announcers and everyone on Twitter was just loving them. This tried and true, pure sportsmanship going on in golf. And I couldn't stand it. I was so out on our overblown fascination with this weird romanticized idea of how important sportsmanship. You know what? I honestly would have loved it a lot more if Sergio had been talking in his backswing. If he had been trying to do something in his line. Any bit of gamesmanship in there, I would have appreciated, just to run counter to this stupid narrative we have that for some reason, and maybe it's the country club sports, maybe it's just golf, but we hold on to this idea that you have to play with all of this unbelievable, unparalleled honor and integrity that exists in a game where people, as Dominique Foxworth said in a tweet, walk around a field in Georgia with sticks in a bag.
That's probably it. I mean, you're making my point for me. It's basically the culture adds to it, right? Golf is in the same class to me as like the bowlings and the pools and that sort of stuff, where it takes skill to do what you're doing, but those don't take it themselves quite as seriously. It takes itself very seriously. So maybe it's part of that culture, that gentleman's sport culture. You know, the idea that you have to be quiet. You know, it always cracks me up, the announcers, because you don't do that in other sports. People scream during free throws or field goal kicks, and that's very similar, right?
And that's my thing, too, is that's not what normal people do when they play golf. Like in every other sport, for the most part, what you're doing when you're playing it ends up being what happens at the highest level. Like when you go out and play pickup hoops, you'll hear guys trash-talking each other all the time. And at the NBA level, guys are trash-talking each other all the time. When you go out and play golf with your friends, when I go out and play golf with my friends, one of the best parts of the round is trying to mess with and get inside guys' heads. That was one thing my dad always said was the most fun part about playing with Greeny when they would go out and play these pro-ams, was that Greeny, you could get inside his head easier than anyone on the planet, and he would wilt because of it. You could say one thing to get him off, and that's part of the gamesmanship of being out there with your friends. If you're out there playing with these guys, and these guys on the tour all know each other, and some of them like each other, I would like it more if some of these guys didn't like each other, and that bled onto the course. That would make it even more compelling for me, but no one is going out and around and respecting their friend's line or doing these. You're trying to mess with and win at all costs, just like you are in every other sport, and there's part of me that would like these guys to be able to explore those feelings.
Well, I think you should, have to run to your ball or something. There should be some sort of thing, or if the other guy beats you to your ball and like kicks it out backwards, you have to start from where he kicked it backwards to, or something, or through it, something like that. There needs to be some physical activity involved for me.
Look, I mean, we did on Levitard, more joking, but the fixed golf conversation, where I said, like, throw more alligators in the ponds. Have a horn that goes off in the middle of the round where everyone has to play with their opposite hand until the horn blows again. Stuff like that just along the way would completely jeopardize the integrity of the sport, but would make it more interesting for me in a lot of those moments. But regardless of all those things that are certainly stories for another day that I would like to see, I got really tired of hearing that over and over. The same thing happened when Kuchar hit that hole-in-one and gave the ball to the little kid. Everyone's like, oh, what a classy gesture, what a classy move from him. That was the cockiest thing I saw all day. How many hole-in-ones has that guy racked up in his life where the hole-in-one ball at Augusta at the Masters means so little to him that he's just throwing them out into the crowd like candy?
The humble arrogance. People like to mask their arrogance sometimes with humility, and it is very annoying. And here's one other annoying thing before we get to the calls, because we got the calls lining up at 888-729-3776. I think something that bothers me is that people who play golf want to pretend they're like athletes, right? So they want to pretend what's happening is actually like athleticism at its highest level because it's what they do, when really golfing is what people do when they can no longer play the sports. That's what we always see with the Michael Jordans and the Charles Barkleys and the people of that ilk. So maybe if people were a little bit more, honest about it, and what you're actually looking at, I think that would change things a little bit, because it is competition. There's no doubt about that, and it is hard. I mean, I know it would frustrate me because I'm not good with things I can't get better at just by trying harder, right? And golf is definitely, it's like baseball. You don't get better by trying harder at the plate. You get better by being better, and the same thing has to go for golf.
I mean, it's the 10,000-hour rule and then some, and that's why I have to remind myself that I don't practice enough to feel like I should be getting better at golf. But at the same time, there is still that frustration. But we ask these guys to temper their emotions so much. We talked about yesterday, part of the thrill of it was just the structure. You had built-in drama because of how close it was. Let these guys explore some of those emotions, show some of those emotions, not just after they've finally won it the way Sergio did on that 18th green.
First and last.
There's somebody who doesn't think that's the most important thing in going into an MVP. And I find this timing curious. Very curious timing from James Harden as Mike Golic Jr. strokes his beard. It seemed like yesterday was it. Like yesterday, there's been a few moments this year where you go, there's the MVP, but I think yesterday was it because Russell Westbrook passed Oscar Robertson. He's officially averaged a triple-double, and he hit the game winner. Everyone was like, okay, he finally won the MVP. And it just so happens right after that, James Harden has this to say.
You know, lots of conversations about different stats and your total assists and points produced and Russ's triple-doubles. Is team record something that matters to players?
I think that's the most important thing. I mean, I thought winning was what this was about, period. So I'm not going to get into depth with all that, but I thought winning was the most important thing. And, you know, if you set your team up in a position to, have a chance at the ultimate goal, then that's the most important thing.
So this is kind of the dangerous area. Like, that line of thinking is what I think drives most MVP awards in any sport, is the best player on one of the best, if not the best teams, which to me has always been a lazy model of thinking. At the same time, in this, you also understand that we've attached a lot of meaning to a kind of arbitrary stat that just has a fun name, so you can get his gripe, especially for a player that's had a great year, that's accomplished a lot on a team that we talk about as a legitimate contender. But you're right, I think you said it before the show, but this just sounds like sour grapes in a moment where he realizes that the one thing he probably would have had a chance to get in this season, because there's still a bit of, in my mind, maybe second, maybe third in the pecking order as far as teams that have a shot of winning a title. This was something he very could have won now, cemented it during the regular season, and it's clearly going to escape him.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a few ways you could take this. To Harden's defense, we all of a sudden are acting like the Rockets were supposed to be very good. That was not what the preseason narrative was necessarily. I don't think anybody expected them to be bad, but the Rockets were not great a year ago. The moves they made, they didn't blow anybody away in the offseason. They turned out to all work out well. And shout out to Daryl Morey, who's really done a tremendous job GMing that team, regardless of what you think about his methodology. But the moves that they made for the likes of Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson, nobody was in love over the offseason. They all seemed to fit with Harden, though. And that's what they did very well. They did a couple of things very well in the offseason. They brought in Mike D'Antoni, who's a perfect match with Harden, because Mike D'Antoni's offense calls for one player to dominate the ball, and Harden dominates the ball. And instead of waiting for him to come off screens, he just gave it to him from go and let him play that Steve Nash role. And then they signed a bunch of players who can score but don't need the ball to do so they can play well with Harden without getting, antsy or whatnot, because Harden is a tough guy to play with, like a lot of those guys, if you also need to get yours as far as handling the ball on the outside. So they did a lot of things to make that team fit. At the same time, they're not doing what they're doing without James Harden. So he did elevate that team to a degree that I don't think most people thought they would be this season, where they'd be third in the Western Conference. But the Thunder are winning, too. And the Thunder are winning relative to the roster that they have. I mean, I don't know if it would be possible to lose Kevin Durant and for them to be anywhere close to where they were a year ago. And if you want to just talk about straight winning, the Cavs have a better record in games that LeBron James has played than the Rockets do in games that James Harden has played.
Yeah, it all starts to add up. I think the point you made there at the end, too, just by having to deal with that void left by Kevin Durant, that added something to the value of everything they did this year, because you're right, while the Rockets may not have made any notable additions, there was a monstrous subtraction in Oklahoma City that they had to deal with and overcome, that they had become accustomed to for the last 7 or 8 years before that, with those guys playing together and always working in tandem, being the tag team champions of the world that you had so often referred to them as.
By the way, Daryl Morey's going to be on Mike and Mike today at 8:30. I promise you a point he will make is about the arbitrary arbitrary nature of a triple-double and how we're assigning extra value to it because it has a name.
You know what the irony of it is, too, is that last night James Harden also had a triple-double, went 35, 11, and 15 in their win over the Kings this weekend. So the irony of all ironies there. So I guess a point off of all this around the MVP conversation, because one of the things Sports Talk Radio all-time tracks list is, what is the MVP actually about? And I heard Dominique Foxworth, Clinton Yates, and Mina Kimes in the morning roast this weekend. Mina made her push to her hot take was that MVP should be abolished. We shouldn't do that award anymore because we can't clearly define what we're looking for. And you talk about value, and I know you'll make the point, and a lot of others will, that there's no more valuable player to his team than LeBron James. But if we're going to go the other route and just say, all right, it's about the best player in a given year, if you look at these two guys just on the court, forget value to their team, forget how their teams have performed winning-wise, when you look at these two, and I'll certainly defer to you to the beginning of this because you watch a lot more basketball than I do, which one of these guys is better? Like, who would you rather have on your team, Russell Westbrook or James Harden?
It's tough. I mean, it really is a toss-up. There's been times where I would have said James Harden because of his three-point shot and getting to the free throw line, but we've also seen Harden struggle a little bit when the games are a little bit more important, and he's not getting the benefit of that whistle. And Russell Westbrook has really won me over the course of this season, too. I mean, I don't think there is a right or a wrong answer in that, and that's what's great about it. Let's make it – how about this? As I said about the MVP before, but let's just make it the better player wins this series, right? The teams are close enough. You know, that's how we can penalize Westbrook for not winning, is if he can't beat Harden in a series here, because if he's the MVP, they should win that series. But to your point about the best player, too, LeBron James is averaging a career high, I believe, in rebounds and assists. He's averaging the most assists a non-guard has ever had in a single season. He's scoring more than 25 points per game on 55% shooting. You know, no player in NBA history has ever averaged 25, 8, and 8 on 54% shooting before. So I'm not so sure he hasn't been the best player either. What's holding him back, and we know they blew a 26-point lead yesterday, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the show, and I love all the people who have been tweeting me saying, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that, because that's really the only ammunition LeBron haters have is these like meaningless regular season things. Are they really underachieving in the sense of every time he doesn't play, they lose? You know, I look at their net rating. When LeBron's on the court, they're plus 7.7 per 100 possessions. When he's off the court, they're minus 8.5 per 100 possessions. So is it really fair to say that they're underachieving when we see how low they achieve when he's not actually on the court?
Yeah, it's weird that we judge LeBron by the standards that he's set on past teams, and so that's probably what people say when they believe that they're underachieving at the 1 seed this year, is it's based on the teams that we've seen from LeBron past, and I guess I don't know, maybe it's the burden of expectation, but the irony in that is Russell Westbrook has wowed us this year doing exactly what we expected him to do as the only show in town in Oklahoma City. We all joked going into this year that he would finally get to play the style and brand of basketball that he wanted with Kevin Durant out of the frame, and he did exactly that, and we're somehow still blown away by that. And so for LeBron, maybe it really just is a different set of circumstances and expectation that exist for him and only him at this point.
Lamb VM10 tweets in, the Thunder 45.5 win total and the Rockets 41.5, according to Las Vegas Superbook in the preseason. Rockets exceeded by 13 games. So does James Harden have a point? You know, has Russell Westbrook not won enough to pass Harden in the MVP voting? 888-729-3776. I'm really thinking about your question, because earlier in this year I'd said Harden. I would take Harden over Westbrook because he stretches you so far out on the court as well. You know, the outside shot is a part of it, goes to the rim and from beyond three. But Russell Westbrook's just had such an awesome year that it's hard to ignore it. I mean, they called him the force in that Thunder broadcast. He really has been just like a force of nature this year.
And I think that's something to be said for both of their games stylistically, the way it looks. Everything Russell Westbrook does is impressive and physical and dominantly athletic in almost every single movement, whereas James Harden, part of his game is that he's one of the most gifted artists at drawing fouls that I've ever seen.
He kind of cheats.
And there's part of it that if you're looking at it in that sense, it feels cheap. He's getting to the line off a lot of these things that it's wrong to say that because it's nuance and it's an understanding of where defenders are, and he uses every tool at his disposal. And is a guy who was a bit, not quite, athletic enough to challenge some of my peers. I understand the value of using every tool at your disposal, and some part of me appreciates that. But when you're just watching the two, what Russ does pops, and what James Harden does, like you says, feels cheap at times.
First and last, the podcast.
Javel Jameson tweets in, I hope Sergio Garcia really did win. What's the statute of limitations on an email challenge?
Listen, we've got to stop this. Now, I understand this started in an LPGA event, but we had another instance yesterday where Sergio, on a drop where, oddly enough, the official who's out there supposed to be watching all these things had his back turned to Sergio while he made the drop over on the Pine Needles. I forget on what hole it exactly happened. But then you had another instance of someone deciding it was their duty, their civic duty to the pristine nature of golf to call in and make sure that this is reported. First off, and it was rightly tweeted at me a number of times, this is on the PGA. You have to stop giving these people any sort of merit in this because you're rewarding this sort of what I want to call criminal behavior. I think snitching at this level and in these kind of situations should be a criminal violation. I said the offender's name should be made public so that we can all know that we're in the presence of a snitch, so that you and your family can know that someone that you know and think that you might love right now is out here narking to the PGA on behalf of some unwritten code. Well, it's even a written code, and I don't care that much. That is not on the responsibility of the fans. If you're watching football this fall and you're watching an Atlanta Falcons game and you want to phone in a holding call on Alex Mack, your friends would promptly punch you in the face. And so I'm encouraging golf fans to just dial it back a little bit. Because this exists in no other place. I don't know what would drive a person to sit there so miserable in their own existence that they would look at some minor even appearance of an infraction, because nothing actually happened with Sergio on that drop that was a violation of rules, and look at that and say, oh, I can be golf's white knight. I can save the day on this one and make sure the proper champion is crowned. No, let the people do their jobs, even if, in this instance, the guy that was supposed to be doing his job really wasn't.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.